Hey everybody, welcome to lesson 3. So today what we're going to be covering is order of operations. Now I know everybody's pretty much normally taught this with in this way in high school, and some people remember it as an acronym with the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. A lot of my students just remembered it as PEMDAS. I'm not really sure how your teacher taught you, but this is supposed to guide us in order of operations. The problem is this can be, or it is, extremely misleading. So let's kind of break this down and make sure we understand it. Usually they say the P is for parentheses. That is misleading. Instead of parentheses, we need to think of this as all grouping symbols. Okay? And when you have a grouping symbol, you go inside of that grouping symbol, and inside of that grouping symbol, you run through the order of operations. Okay? Now, there are some grouping symbols that are implied, that are understood, that are not visible. Okay? One of the grouping symbols is when you have a big fraction with operations on top and on bottom. There are understood grouping symbols on the top and on the bottom of each fraction. So those are just implied. We don't draw them there, but they're understood to be there. Other understood grouping symbols are things like absolute values, square roots or radicals. You do what's inside these first before you use up the absolute value or before you use up the square root. So those are grouping symbols. What comes next are exponents. I think that's pretty self-explanatory, but we will talk about exponents here before we actually do some order of operations. Now, these last four are the most misleading part of this. So most people read this and think you're supposed to multiply before you divide, but that is not the case. These are of equal importance. Equal importance. So, for instance, if I have 6 divided by 2 times 3, the first operation I'm going to do is not multiply, it's division. Division and multiplication are of the same level of power, so you do them as you get to them from left to right. So I would actually divide first, then multiply. And the same thing holds for addition and subtraction. These are also of equal importance or equal power. So if I have like 5 minus 2 plus 3, I'm going to do these as I see them from left to right. Okay? Now when I mix adding and subtracting, multiplying, dividing together, make sure you do your multiplications and divisions before you do your addings and subtractings. And we're going to do things as we see them left to right with this order in mind. Okay, so we'll do some examples later in the lesson, but this is why it can be quite misleading. So it's really 4 things: grouping symbols, exponents, multiplications, and additions. I can say it that way because remember, dividing is just multiplying by reciprocal. Subtracting is just adding the opposite. So now before we jump into doing some of these, let's make sure everybody can do an exponent really quickly. We're not going to ask you anything really hard, but you do need to be able to do some exponents. So what is an exponent? What's a base? Let me give you an example. All an exponent is, let's see, if I did something like 3 squared. This number down here that is on the bottom is called the base. The little number up high is the exponent, and that's telling you how many of these bases I have. So 3 to the second power to the 2 power tells me I have 2 of these multiplied, and 3 times 3 is 9. So I could do something like 2 to the 5 power. Well, that tells me that I have 5 2's being multiplied. 2, 3, 4, 5. So I don't know what that is. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. Okay? Or one more example. 5 to the third tells me I have 3 5s being multiplied. So 5 times 5 is 25 times 5 is 125. So you should be able to do those. You can use your calculator. There is a button on your calculator to do exponents. But we need to talk about something really important, and that is parentheses when it comes to these. So there is a very drastic difference in something like, I do not know what I'm writing. Here we go. Negative 5 in parentheses squared versus negative 5 with no parentheses squared. There actually is quite a big difference here. So here's how exponents work. They're counting how many of something you have, right? So I had 2 3s here, but they only count what they are touching, what they are right against. So this 2 is actually touching this parenthesis. It's a grouping symbol. So what this means is my base, so let's actually take some time to write some things out. That means the base for this one is negative 5, because that is what the 2 is touching, is connected to the parenthesis, and parenthesis groups things, it gathers it all up, so I have to have the front of the parenthesis and everything in between it. So if I were to do what they call expanding this out, where I write it out, that's going to be negative 5 times negative 5. That's just what I did here, was expand them out. And then I can actually get the answer, evaluate. The answer here is, what's a negative times a negative? We did that a few lessons ago. That's a positive. So 5 times 5 is a positive 25. That's going to be actually different than this one over here. Because what is the 2 touching? The 2 is touching just the 5. This negative, you can think of it as kind of floating. It's not attached to anything out here. So what is our base? What's the 2 touching? The 2 is just touching 5. Not negative 5, just the 5. So if I wanted to expand this out, I'm going to have 2 5s. Now I can't forget this negative floating out here, so I'll put it, but I have 5 times 5 and it's floating negative. So if I want to evaluate it, I have 5 times 5 is 25 with a negative floating out front. So I get negative 25. So these do give you different answers. Now when we speak, and I say negative 5 squared, I usually mean this one. But when we go to put these in our calculator, we need to be extremely careful of the difference in those. Okay. Now, before I move on to order of operations, I have one more thing to cover with you. Let me make it so there's not writing everywhere. Is radicals or roots. So for instance, like a square root. So I could ask you, like, what's the square root of 36? What a square root is it's kind of the inverse or the opposite of doing exponents. You're trying to think what squared or what times itself gives you 36. And the answer is 6. And I could say because 6 times 6 equals 36. Okay. Now I can do more than just a square root. We put the different number in here. So for instance, I could do something like the third root. I could do other roots, a third root. Well, that means what number times itself 3 times equals 125. The answer for that one's 5. We've already seen that up here because 5 times 5 times 5 equals 125. So notice a third root and a third power are kind of opposites. So this is because 5 times 5 times 5 equals 125. Now you can just type a third root of 125 in your calculator. That'll make life simple on you. We're not going to ask you anything nasty. These are just in the order of operation problems. Okay, so that's kind of why I wanted to hit those before we jump into actually getting to do these order of operation things. So let's do some examples, making sure we use good order of operations. So let's start with negative 12 divided by 4 plus 6 parentheses minus 3. And so let's talk about this one. So if we go through order of operations, we say, okay, are there any grouping symbols? And you look and you say, I see some right there, but there's no operation in there. So I don't have to worry about it. We'll say we're good on grouping symbols. There's nothing to do in there. Now, do I have any exponents? You look, you say no. So we're on to this stage of multiplying and dividing. Now, I see a division right there. There's no operation between the 6 and the parentheses, so that's a multiplication. So I need to do these as I come to them from left to right. So negative 12 divided by 4, that is negative 3. Bring down your plus sign. 6 times negative 3, that is negative 18. So I have taken care of the multiplications and divisions. So now I get to the additions and subtractions. So lucky for us, there's only one addition left, negative 3 plus negative 18, that is negative 21. And so be sure to be careful following your order of operations. Let's do another one. I might erase this and rewrite it so we can kind of go through it like a checklist. Let's see, how about 10 minus parentheses 5 minus 3 times 2 to the third power, close parentheses. And so if I'm going to run through my order of operations, the first thing I look for is grouping symbols, parentheses, and I see that I have some grouping symbols right here. So from here to here, I'm going to work using my order of operations inside here first. So let's look inside here. Do I have any grouping symbols? Run through it again. Do I have any grouping symbols in here? The answer is no. Do I have any exponents in here? And yeah, I actually have an exponent right there. So I can do that exponent. That is my next step. Bring down everything else. That is a times 2 to the third power. Do some scratch work. That just means 2 3 times. 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. Okay. So now inside here I've used up the exponents. Now I'm on to multiplying and dividing, and I have a multiplication right there. Put equal signs. 3 times 8 is 24. And then finally I can do the addition and subtraction inside of here. 5 minus 24, that is negative 19. Okay. So now we have finished everything inside this grouping symbol. So let's start over again, looking at the entire thing. Are there any more parentheses? You say, well, there's some here, but I've done everything in there, so we're done with parentheses. Are there any exponents? No. Multiplications and divisions? No. I just have a subtraction here. Or I'm going to want to turn it into an addition anyways, to adding the opposite. So 10 plus 19 is 29. Remember, subtracting is just adding the opposite. Okay, let's do a few more examples of these before we move on to one last topic, which is really the same topic. How about 6 minus absolute value, 2 minus 10. So we have an absolute value. So if you're looking to run through your order of operations, first thing you look for is grouping symbols, parentheses. Do I have any? And you say, yeah, actually, these serve as grouping symbols, so I do what's inside of these first. So we'll bring down the 6 minus and bring down our grouping symbols, and we're going to work inside of these. There's only one thing to do. 2 minus 10 is negative 8. So check, that was pretty simple. So now I need to use up these grouping symbols. Since these grouping symbols can actually be an action, I need to take the absolute value of negative 8. So bring down my 6, my minus. What is the absolute value of negative 8? That's going to be positive 8. So I have 6 minus positive 8. So only one operation. I don't need to read through the rest of these. 6 minus 8 is negative 2. Alright, how about let's get one that looks confusing that's actually not too bad. 5 times 3 minus 3 squared divided by 33 minus 2 to the 4th. Okay, so we start with grouping symbols, and you say, I don't see any, but then I say, wait. Remember, there's understood grouping symbols on top and on the bottom. So I can't do the division or trying to reduce this or anything across the top and the bottom until I work everything on top and everything on bottom. So let's take care of the top. Inside here, do I have parentheses? No. Do I have exponents? Yes. So I'm going to want to do that exponent first. 3 squared will be 9. Okay. And then I will need to do my order of operations. Say I need to take care of multiplications and divisions next. That's next after exponents. 5 times 3 is 15. So I have 15 minus 9 on top. And then finally I can do 15 minus 9, which will be 6. Okay, so I've done the top. Let's do the bottom now. 33 minus, I have an exponent. So we're doing exponents. 2 to the 4th. Ooh, let's see. 2 to the 4th is 16. And then I can just do the subtraction. 33 minus 16 is 17. So I get 6 over 17. That does not reduce. I'm good to go. You can do a lot of this in your calculator if you know how to use your calculator and you take it slow and easy and very careful with parentheses. Let's do one more order of operations example. Let's go with a big square root, and inside we're going to put negative 5 minus 6 parentheses 5 parentheses negative 1. Now these parentheses, there's nothing inside them. They're just there to mark multiplications. Okay, so let's run through order of operations. Now I asked for grouping symbols, and you say, well, there's actually a grouping symbol right here. We got to do everything inside the radical before we can take the square root. So that's just going to hang out there until the end. Are there any exponents inside there? No. Now we need to do multiplications and divisions, and there happen to be 2 multiplications right here. So I'm going to leave negative 5, and let's see, minus 6 times 5 times negative 1. Well, 6 times 5 is 30, times negative 1 makes this a negative 30. And now I can do my adding and subtracting inside there. Well, minus a negative 30. Remember, we're going to well, turn this into adding the opposite. So negative 5 plus 30, that becomes positive 25. So now I've done everything inside the radical. I can finally use the radical. What's the square root of 25? It is just 5. Okay. So that's a good taste of order of operations. Make sure you practice the worksheet of those and see if you have any questions. Let's dive into one last topic, which is just evaluating expressions by plugging in values. So if you look at this, I give you an expression right here of 5 times a divided by 3 times b. And then I tell you what a and what b are. So what we would like you to do is start practicing being able to plug in values and evaluate, because that's a very useful skill, especially for 111. Well, I strongly suggest that you don't just write the number there, because I've had so many students think this is 56 or something like that. Whenever you're plugging in for a variable, I strongly suggest that you put parentheses, write it out exactly as you see it, 5 blank divided by 3 blank, put parentheses for those blanks, then plug them in. A is 6, so let's put a 6 here. B is 5, so let's put a 5 here, and then it's just order of operations. Okay, this one's going to be a very tricky one for order of operations though, because if I'm doing, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, we don't have any grouping symbols, we don't have any exponents. Everything is multiplies and divisions. We need to be careful and work these as we see them from left to right. So where's the first one we see? We see 5 times 6, which happens to be 30. Then we keep working them from left to right. The next one we see is actually the division, 30 divided by 3. That's going to get some people, because a lot of people are going to want to jump on this multiplication, but don't do that. We got to do multiplications and divisions as the same level of importance from left to right. Then we have 10 times 5, which is 50. Okay, so still make sure you keep in mind your order of operations. You gotta hang on to that very strongly, otherwise it'll toast you without you realizing it. So just keep an idea, or keep an eye out for that. Now let's do 2 more examples, and then I'll let you go. Let's get a fresh page just to have more space. So what if I tell you something like 7 minus a squared, and I tell you that a is equal to negative 2? Well, we still want to take this the same route. Blank squared. So notice I copied down everything except for the a. I left blank parentheses, and I will put in my negative 2. Well, now I can go about doing my order of operations, which says first I'm going to do this exponent. Well, parentheses negative 2 squared, that's going to be a positive 4. This piece right here comes out to a positive 4. Bring down everything else, then it's just 7 minus 4, that's 3. So that's pretty simple. And then one last one that's a focus, is they want you to be able to use formulas. So we're going to give you the formula for area of something like a triangle, and then give you a base and a height, and just ask you, hey, what's the area of the triangle? So let's see, let's do a base of 3 and a height of 6. Well, we can do this exactly the same way. Area is going to equal 1/2 the base times the height. Let's see, our base is 3, our height is 6, and we need to multiply this through. Now, these are all 3 multiplications, so we will work them as we see them left to right. So this is really easy. 1/2 times 3 is 3/2, because I could put a 1 on the bottom and multiply the tops and bottoms, times 6. Let's turn that into a fraction. That'll be 18 over 2, which reduces to 9. Okay, so now make sure you do your worksheet and scan it in and post it, or send it back to me in Blackboard. It'll be posted in Blackboard. Email me if you have any questions. I hope things are going swimmingly so far. I know that chapter 1's a bit boring, and it's old stuff, it's dreary stuff, it's stuff that you already know, but just make sure you pay attention and are kind of setting good habits in the class, and make sure you use this test 1 to easily get a really good grade. Work your tail off, get a good grade to start the class. But anyways, you guys have an awesome day.